all of these resilient qualities, they're not ingredients like a recipe in a cookbook. They really are things that are relational based. And so if I have patience, I have people in my life that have shown me patience and have maybe nudged me toward patience sometimes. Mm-hmm. And those become my resources to pass on.
That is Dr. John Seymour, and this is the Well-Mind Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ben Coles. Welcome back, everybody. It is great to be here back in the studio, and thank you for choosing to spend some of your time with me today. 2020 is in the rearview mirror, and 2021 is in front of us. But before we get into this episode, I want to share some exciting news with you. Over the past 3 years, I have been involved in researching, proposing, developing, and working on accreditation for a brand new Master of Arts program in clinical mental health counseling here at Bethany Lutheran College. I received word at the end of December from our accreditation review panel that they have recommended approval for the program. This is fantastic news, and prayerfully the accreditation will be made official at the end of January when that voting body for the accreditor meets. So I plan to have a website for the program up soon. We're just making some of the final edits and additions to that. And then we'll be looking to accept applications for students sometime in February. I probably don't have to say this, but it's been a massive undertaking, just a huge project and a real labor of love for me. And the support from my colleagues here at the college, the Board of Regents, has just been fantastic throughout this whole process. Our plan is to launch the program this fall semester, fall of 2021, with our first cohort of students. So I'll put a link to the website for the program in the show notes once it goes live. Hopefully even when this show gets published, I'll have that available and can share that. So I'll talk more about the program in future episodes, share more information about what some of the format and goals and those kind of things are. But I just wanted to share some good news with you at the beginning of today's show. So thanks for indulging me for a moment there. Now, today's conversation between John and I is just fantastic. I've yet to dive into the topic of family wellness on the podcast, and I thought this would be a really important place to start in the first episode of the new year. Now, John and I recorded this episode a few days before Christmas, so I've had to hold on to this one for just a bit, which is okay. And we ended up, you'll understand when you listen, we ended up having a white Christmas after all, so my kids were super excited about that, so that's a good thing. I've known John for over 15 years. He was my advisor and a mentor for me during my graduate studies at MSU here in Mankato, and that was right, of course, at the beginning of my journey in developing my professional identity as a counselor. So John is just a treasure, and I'm so grateful that we've stayed in touch over the years. In our conversation in this episode, we take a close look at how the realities of the past year have impacted families, but also created an inflection point for families to build and cultivate resilience as we move into 2021. John shares his accumulated wisdom through rich stories, insightful reflections, meaningful questions, and thoughtful encouragements to help families move toward closeness and trust in their relationships. John's easy manner and humble attitude make conversation with him just fun and enjoyable. So I hope you like this one. Here is episode 13 of the Well-Mind Podcast, Family Resilience with Dr. John Seymour. Welcome, Dr. John Seymour, to the Well Mind podcast. It is wonderful to have you with us today.
Well, Dr. Ben Coles, thank you very much for having me. It has uh, was a great experience having you years ago as a student, and then watching you develop your career in a couple of different states in a couple of different ways, and getting your doctorate, and now coming here back to Mankato
Yep.
with a family, and really launching some really exciting things here in the community. So
No, I
it's
appreciate
it's
that.
just it's
Yeah.
just great. It's just great fun to watch that story unfold too for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You have been a integral part in a few of these different stages for me professionally. And so the fact that I get to have you on the podcast today is just super rewarding for me, and just exciting that I get to share you with the audience of the Well Mind, because this is you know, unless you're attending a conference or being a student at MSU in one of your classes, um, I think, yeah, people aren't gonna have that opportunity to get to know you. So being able to share you on this platform, I think, is just really great.
Well, and you digital natives are so much better acquainted with the methods of how to do it now, which have become even more critically important as
Yeah,
we have
yeah,
been living this pandemic life and
for sure.
hibernating year round.
Yeah, and that's in part what this podcast has kind of come out of. Like, I honestly think if there hadn't been this pause during this pandemic, that a project like this may not have ever happened for me, because just with the emphasis that I've had on clinical work and supervision, um, getting a counseling program developed here at Bethany, like that, it's just been a huge, um, well, obviously a huge focus. So to have a little bit of breathing space to be able to do something special like this, yeah, has, to take your word, it's just been fun.
Yeah, yeah. We've all dealt with a lot of difficulties and a lot of disappointments in the past year, but that ability to pause and actually take the pause that we have advocated for others for many years
Oh,
as
sure.
mental health professionals, and as we've probably promised to ourselves and our families that we would do more of. And now here we are. Life has dealt a lot of strange things to us this last year, but we've also had some of those opportunities to pause and really pause. And
Hmm.
these are the things that can come out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Just creating some quiet space to be able to think and reflect, and then coming, for me, it's been like coming out of that space. It's like, okay, these are things that are on my mind. These are things that are on my heart. These are values that I hold. How can I express those? How can I live those in an authentic way, but in a way that hopefully is meaningful? And so, yeah, so that yeah, that's been a huge motivation for me within this project of the podcast. Before we get too far, though, John, we should just give help the audience get to know you a little bit here, and know some things about your background. Like I mentioned, you're a presenter, you're a professor, you've been training counselors, but you're also a clinician yourself. So just give me the overview, I guess, of your kind of background professionally, and we can kind of go from there.
Well, many years ago, I started with a Master's of Divinity degree and then a Master's of Family Therapy degree, and worked at the master's level for nearly 20 years as a clinician, and worked in a lot of different settings, inpatient, outpatient, private practice, agencies. And worked with a variety of age groups. Some of it health based because part of that time I was affiliated with hospital settings. So, but other parts of it more community, family life based issues. And 20 years ago, moved here from Texas, where I had been in practice in the Dallas area, and moved into teaching for a 20-year stint at Minnesota State Mankato in their CSP program there. And along with that, I have maintained some practice on the side for nearly all of the time that I have been here. But most recently, I've been for nearly 10 years now at Journeys Toward Healing Counseling Center here in Mankato. And another one of those projects from people like you, former students of the program here at MSU, who have gone on and successfully created their business there, and have had to deal with me as an employee, as well as professor and advisor at some point. So
yeah, what a flip. I'm sure that's been a flip for them to go from that role into managing, running a practice, and having you on board. What a cool opportunity for them.
Yeah, but a year ago I retired from the university, but I've stayed with the counseling clinic, and still that's a great love for me. And we realized as we approached retirement that we'd really lived here in Mankato longer than we had anywhere in our lives. So this has really become home, even though not quite the temperature that I remember my home to be back on the Texas Gulf Coast. I don't miss the heat. But right now, I'm not missing the snow. Sorry, snow aficionados out there, but
my kids are a little disappointed that there's no snow on the ground and Christmas is a week away.
Oh, I know there are lots of people, but it certainly was a change for us. But this has been home. It still is. We've plan on spending our days here, so
awesome.
It's been a good choice.
Well, and it's a blessing to have you in the community working with families here through your clinical practice. And, I've served in urban and rural areas, and without a doubt, the need in rural areas, but then the lack of, qualified providers, that there's such a disparity there. When I was down in Florida, part of my time was working at a community mental health center there. And like, again, community center, they're saying our resources are limited and these kind of things. But the reality is that they had a community mental health center, and they had qualified clinicians, and they had universities nearby that were training people. And there was this kind of constant funnel of people coming in. But you get into some of these rural areas, and really stepping outside of Mankato, it's all very, very rural. So the opportunity for people to access services is pretty limited. So I know what a blessing it is to have folks like you in the community continuing to serve families.
Well, that said, part of what I so value about the last 20 years is being able to be a part of training and putting a number of people out into southern Minnesota that are serving in those areas, and probably serving some of our rural areas better than others in other parts of the country. Because I think at MSU, with our program and some of the others, there's always been a good contingent of people who come from southern Minnesota who want to continue to serve in some way in southern Minnesota and live there. And I think we've been fortunate to be able to help keep a pipeline of good people coming back into the community and serving people. It's really kind of an invisible resource that I don't think we really think of very often. But
No, probably
and
not.
it goes beyond mental health. I mean, the everywhere from city planners to nurses to business people. It was great for 20 years to be a part of that kind of pipeline of talent that has kind of kept this area really pretty vital.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
because we really are rather rural,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, for sure.
I only have to drive about a half a mile from my house in Mankato to see that. So
Mm-hmm.
um, we've done
Absolutely.
well, and I've enjoyed having a small part in that.
Yeah, and it's great for me being back in this community. You know, I didn't stay as soon as I think it was like the month after I graduated. I was moving into a house in Florida,
Yes,
and
indeed.
so it certainly has come full circle in being back in this community, and a real joy for me certainly too. You know, you were referencing me being a student, and yeah, my all my master's work was done at MSU in the counseling and student personnel department with you and Diane and Rick, and the whole group there has just been fantastic. And staying in touch with each of you over the years has uh, been a blessing for me as well. The courses that I took from you were primarily in family work, right?
Mhm.
All of anything that I knew coming out of school about working with families and couples from a therapeutic perspective was really from the time that I spent in class with you. And to be able to have you on the podcast today to really talk about family, about resiliency within our families, to talk about um, parents' relationship with their children and how critically important that relationship is to really encouraging kids to be on the side of resilience as they're growing and developing rather than on the side of risk. I'm just really excited to get into that with you, but kind of maybe as a jumping off point, I'm wondering, what was it that drew you to wanting to work with families, to making this a career long, whether in the clinic or in the classroom, a focus for you to say, I want to help families?
Well, I think my first job out of grad school really cemented that because I had a tremendous opportunity to do a 2 year internship and residency in Houston at a large hospital there, um, which 1,000-bed hospital that had virtually every kind of medical service. And and realizing as I worked with patients that patients were always a part of a bigger picture. And of course, whether it was in pediatric care or the psychiatric unit or in the emergency room as families would come in with loved ones or the cardiac care area, uh, family was very much part of that, the health and unhealth process that was going on. And just seeing firsthand how important that was, as families dealt with a family member who had a stroke or and was recovering or had been diagnosed with cancer and were in treatment. And um, so really it was just a practical everyday, every room that I visited, it got reinforced. And it was, I think, history wise, it was always also a great time because family therapy was really, really blooming as an interest area. And, some of the major people that, kind of developed the field and expanded the field were really busy at the time. So it was good timing there too. I
Mm-hmm.
got into the field at a time where there's a lot of growing interest, and
Yeah.
so I got to go along with that.
That's so fascinating to me because for me, working in a hospital system for a number of years over in Sioux Falls, I saw that emphasis of including mental health and behavioral health professionals in all these different areas of care. So whether that was the ICU, whether that was um, in the cancer treatment center that Avera has, or even just in some of their surgical centers and those kind of things, like outpatient clinics, having social workers, having counselors available, that seemed like such a novel approach that Avera was trying to really have
Yeah,
this kind of mentality of like, we're gonna meet people where they're at with all of our services rather than making them go kind of here, there, and
yeah,
everywhere to get connected with people. But what I'm hearing now is even early in your career, that was something that you were getting to do within your hospital system as a family therapist, was consulting and working with
yeah.
people in kind of all these different areas.
Yeah, and it was, it was in every area of service. Not just in pediatrics or obstetrics. Where you know, would you would see some natural
Yeah, you yeah.
overlap,
Yep,
but really throughout, and so it was a good time, and but it has evolved because
for sure.
the interest has kind of waxed and waned. Um, but I think again we're in a time period where we're both so uh, focused on just a few of our connected relationships, and then we feel so disconnected from so many others. It's it's made people in a lot of fields pause. It's
Yeah,
you started the pause theme.
I did. Yeah.
It's given us that pause of us really reflecting on how important relationships are. What do you do when you uh, are not able to kind of carry on some of those relationships for a while in a way that you usually have? And um, humans are prone to black and white thinking. So it's like, well, we can either have relationships or we can't, and that's just it. And that's that is that's kind of stress thinking and crisis thinking. It's not very helpful for the long run.
Yeah.
And I still remember what Governor Walz said in one of his first news conferences as the pandemic started. He said, "This is not going to just be a blizzard and a few snow days.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is we are doing something that is really different. We
Yeah.
will we will bring some skills that we have because Minnesotans are resilient people, and if you can face the cold, you can face almost anything. And certainly moving here from the Gulf Coast of Texas, I've realized that yes, I think I can live with just about any kind of weather, and that's a pretty good conclusion to draw about people's resilience here in Minnesota.
Yeah.
But we've had a new pause to think about families and why are they important, and what do they do for us, and what do we do with our families that are really the most crucial. And when we can't do some of our usual routines of entertainment or get-togethers or sharing a common interest or um, you know, playing a sports team and playing a favorite sport and competing with the community down the road. When we have all those things kind of put in the background, um, how do we keep really what's important
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
our relationship? So yeah, we are certainly in a major pause for many reasons.
Yeah. And there's, I think, so much value to where you're going with this, John. So I want to slow down and take a look at some of those pieces. And um, and kind of dive into that. So this idea, of pause has certainly been a present reality for families for most of the past year, and depending upon where people live, whether you're in Minnesota, whether you're in some other state in the Midwest, or across the country or internationally, like how much freedom, how much mobility people have really has varied depending upon the month, depending upon COVID numbers, government restrictions, and then also, your personal thoughts, feelings, beliefs are also going to be a huge factor in how much am I doing right now. So just because I
Mhm.
can do something may not mean that that's beneficial for me right now. And I may still be choosing to stay home more frequently or isolate more frequently. And that, again, kind of extends this pause. But pre-COVID, what you're speaking to, I think, really resonates in that um, as a rule, we're very busy, and we're busy with all sorts of things outside of our home, outside of our immediate family. And then there might be some connection, like going to sporting events for our kids or things like that, attending that. But that's really still outwardly focused rather than inwardly focused.
Yeah.
And it seems like because of this pause, it's kind of compelled people to have to be more inwardly focused in terms of toward their immediate family, toward the people in their home, and spending time with them and being around them. So from what you've seen to this point, what have you seen as some of the, I guess, blessings that have come out of that, or opportunities that have come out of that? But then where are the challenges coming up too? I want to talk about kind of both sides of this
Sure.
coin.
Well, to me, one of the challenges is just painfully obvious, which is humans are social species. We only survive and we only thrive when we are connected with other humans. And that is so obviously demonstrated when those little tiny 6 to 8 pound babies are placed in our arms at birth. And I'm a short person with short arms, and that little baby still filled up my hands, and they need us for everything and for a very long time. As I sometimes say, humans are not sea turtles. Uh, Sea turtles, they have the beach blanket bingo. They meet one night on the beach during spring break. I don't know if it's spring break. Don't take the metaphor too literally, biologists in the audience. But uh, they have their quick spring break fling. Some eggs are laid and they disappear, never to come back. And the hatchlings have to hatch themselves, make their way, hopefully, uh, to the water and to food, and begin to grow. But it is a harrowing experience, even for sea turtles. And but humans, we just can't do it. And this pandemic has really hit at the heart of that ability to connect. And because this is a novel coronavirus, that's a word that I only hear a few people say now, but we can't forget it's novel. We knew nothing about it a year ago. A
Mm-hmm.
year ago, I mean, as you're recording this in December, uh, we didn't know anything about it. And so I think, though, never have humans learned so much about so much in so little time. But it is new. And what we had to do is fall back on a medical method of basically of isolation and antiseptics, where you keep germs away from people. But we also know what that was like years and years ago, because there were studies years ago about children that the term was used as hospitalism. That children hospitalized would not thrive and even would die, even when there weren't really clear medical indications as to why.
Okay, so like
And
physical needs were being taken care of at the time: food, water, shelter, those kind of
and
things.
and this is at a similar time that other people are studying, for instance, the post-World War II orphans and that,
Okay.
and seeing some of the same things, that children who were had basic needs cared for, but were not having those richer social
Connections.
nurturing experiences,
Yeah.
and they were not thriving. And so all of that gave birth to a huge amount of research and literature that, in our human development field, results in attachment theory, and a great a great deepening of our understanding of what does it really take to make and develop a human.
Mm-hmm.
And we realized that there were a lot of ingredients, and there's a lot of simmering that goes into that recipe for a very long time. And when we don't have those opportunities, humans don't do so well. Now, they do survive. And that's where we come with resiliency. Resiliency is when you can face adversity and somehow find a way through it. You don't beat it. This isn't a comic book character of Zampow. You defeat the bad stress monster. This is finding how to to manage, rethink, reorganize yourself around the challenges that you're facing, so that you can make it. But that all began with you asking about what is the concern, and that has been my concern, is that we've had so few medically safe ways to be intimately socially involved with one another, and that simply there hasn't been a good answer to that question in a year, and it's still going to be a while before we begin to see some of the benefits of the vaccines, and
Sure.
what can occur.
Mm-hmm.
But this is this is really quite remarkable. The lack. I think back of stories that my grandparents would tell about World War II, and the tough times, and the rationing, and so many people off in the war effort, that many communities, people discovered talents that they didn't realize they had, and people were raising hogs and chickens in their backyards, things that they'd never imagined they might do. But I also remember that part of that experience was every night they said they'd sit on the porch with the radio on, and they would get the news from the war, and then the neighborhood would walk up and down the street, and then stop and check in, and people could check in with each other. So that was a very challenging time, but we were not as deprived of that ability to just reach out and get ordinary physically based kinds of support.
Sure.
And this is one we'll be studying for a while. I think you can probably have a few podcasts on this, and And I think what's going to be just as interesting is a year from now, seeing what we have decided during this pause really is important to us or really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And what priorities do we pick back up
Yeah.
with how we spend our time or what we do with our families or how we approach the workplace? But all of that means that humans, I say humans because this has affected every part of our planet and every age. Uh, we are now having to rethink ourselves and how we do life in a way that maybe we never have had to do before.
Yeah.
Even things like the Great Depression or, the World Wars, or those were massive, massive experiences. But we're talking about an experience today that um, has been virtually universal, although
Mm-hmm.
experienced very differently from place to place. Its impact has gone everywhere.
Yeah, it has.
And it'll be so, a year from now, you'll need to have a couple of folks on to talk about, so what did we pick up and what did we think was important
Mm-hmm.
in 2019 that we can't even remember in
Mm-hmm.
2022?
Yeah.
That will
Yeah.
be an interesting, but that's down the road. You've
That's
probably
for
got some
another
other
day.
topics.
Yeah. Well, but what you're saying really speaks to how these events really shape and influence, a whole generation or even generations to come. And whether it was the Great Depression, the World Wars, those events from that emerged new information from research, new opportunities to understand our human condition or family development, or how, like you said, all these different ingredients to
Yeah.
making a human, and
Yeah.
how important relationship is. And
Yeah.
so I think we're all feeling that pull of like, relationship is so important. There's something that's being that's missing, and we're craving. Um and so, like, within a family unit, and maybe we should even define that. Like, when you think about a family, what how do you even define that, John? Like, what are the pieces there that we're actually talking about when it comes to a family?
Well, I would say that it really only boils down to two things. One is who do I call family, and and who functions as family,
Yeah.
and those are really uh, now for someone my age in my 60s, that has been an evolving uh, viewpoint because I certainly know the family is blood kind of definitions that are still very much a part of our world. But to most anyone under 35, the idea of chosen family doesn't seem to be the least bit strange. It's
Hmm.
like, well, isn't that how you do it? Uh, but certainly, as a family therapist, that's kind of what's defined my work because we have a family who we name as family, but maybe the named family isn't functioning well, and so there's one set of concerns, or the named family doesn't have the resiliency or the resources or the wherewithal to respond adequately. Um, and then there's that chosen family or that named family. Who do I consider
Yeah.
that inner circle? And that is an important part of resiliency, that family really can not only be a genetically defined, but really we give it meaning by what we do with it.
Yeah, these
And
things kind of feed back in on each other in terms of like family is about relationship, and it's through relationship that I identify people as my family,
Yeah.
right? And so in a positive sense, that when I'm connected with somebody, there's nurturing happening, there's closeness, there's trust, these kind of key ingredients to a safe relationship that that builds family, that builds this idea of family and connectedness and being able to count on and rely on others. And as you do that, as you continue to count on them or rely on them, that deepens those bonds of trust and security as well.
Yeah. And of course, there's many, many reasons that things get crosswise there, that and people can have the experience of, well, family isn't acting very much like family.
Yeah.
And that can be something really very simple and almost a story about manners. It can be something really, really traumatic and difficult in terms of domestic violence. So,
Yeah.
I mean, when you can range from domestic violence to how your napkins are folded for the holidays, um, that's a pretty wide range.
Yeah, a lot can happen in that spectrum.
But the challenge though becomes is when we either don't have family that can function like family, or when we're not able to connect. And I think right now one of the challenges is, well, I've got biological family that actually are pretty good support, and I have chosen family that's pretty good support. But how do we support each other right now? And uh, people feel like there's a missing piece. And, it really is. There really is a missing piece.
Yeah.
But for now, what's our workarounds? What's our workarounds? Because, we've certainly had to do it. And certainly humans through the ages have had to adapt to these periods of time of not being able to be close or connected with the people that we were supportive of. So
So
we,
what have been some of the ways that you've seen or you have observed or encouraged people to find those workarounds during this time to be able to connect with both biological and chosen family? And sometimes those are one and the same, but what have you seen or observed as workarounds during this time?
well, I want to be thoughtful here, because this is this is this is also a topic that has become very black and white, polarized, uh, politicized, and
Yeah.
militarized, and how many other adjectives can I come up with? Um, but to me, the pragmatism of this is what it is, and if you acknowledge what is, you develop solutions for what is. When you're not able to say this is what it is, then you can't develop solutions. And another way of saying that, though, is normalizing. This is humans are having a very normal stress response to an ongoing stress that is a very normal response that is now creating kind of abnormal side effects. It's clearly become very difficult. Our stress responses are designed to get us through a quick sprint. They are not designed for that marathon of life. Our public discourse has been totally dominated by what we can't do. Now, I think that's a fair statement to say from almost any political spectrum, or so I think so. But now that would be quite a feat if I actually found that statement that really fit everyone in a time like this.
Mm-hmm.
But I think whoever's been talking, most of what we've had to talk about is what we cannot do. And so we've all now are kind of living like kids in these families, or kids with this particular third grade teacher. I shouldn't pick on third grade teachers, but you'll get letters now. I'm sorry. Uh, Emails. Nobody gets a
Yeah.
letter anymore. Huh. But it's like when we're kids in a family where all we hear is what we can't do. You can't touch this. You can't touch that. I mean, it's like going to Aunt Matilda's house for the holidays. You can't touch anything. You can't eat anything. You can't play with her cat. You can't sit on any of the chairs. You know, on and on it goes. Or we're in that third grade classroom where really there's the model of managing that classroom is just simply no, 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 and not a lot of emphasis on what can be. So I think that nearly all of us, including me, have probably acted sometimes like we're those kids in situations where all we're hearing is no. And,
And so
we
there's
start
more of
saying,
a
we start
proclivity
saying
to
no.
act out.
We start saying no back. But if we can change that conversation to, okay, but what are the yeses? And to me, that's the flip. I mean, we all get sick of the no's. There's a lot about this, though, because some of this is truly life and death, that it lends itself to the no messages. The urgency, that sounds like a no message. If something's urgent, you don't take your time to do something you want to do. You just do what you have to do, and you have to make sure you don't do certain things. And boy, if there is any way to help people disconnect a little bit and say, what can you do? That is definitely a big change. I think, secondly, what I've seen with families is that we, not knowing what to do, many of us have retreated into self-soothing strategies that actually are more isolating. The families that everybody disappears to their own laptop or pulls out their phone, and a parent that's kind of gone back to work because they're doing work from home, and they kind of go back and do work, and the kids start gaming or watching YouTube videos about gaming or whatever else.
It's true. Yep.
Those have the immediate effect of everybody stays settled and calm, but we don't connect.
Yeah.
And it's like, we have a lot of opportunities to connect right now, but oftentimes we are choosing things that disconnect us. So
I wonder
it's
why
like,
that is. I don't often ask why questions. I learned that a long time ago, but this kind of begs the question, why is that happening? If we're all here together as a family, why aren't there more instances of connecting rather than choosing to do these individual self-soothing things?
I can't imagine that there's one contributor, but couple of things that I immediately think about is hidden behind all of this last year is an enormous amount of micro grief. We are constantly, think about some of the conversations that families have had in their heads and with each other and in texts and on the phone over the past month about what are we going to do or did do for Thanksgiving? What are we going to do about the holidays in December? And going back and forth with that, and just the micro losses that are occurring, and there's a lot of grief, and grief slows us down a lot, and grief limits our perspective for a while. I think that's kind of a part of how grief has that period of time of, kind of slowing down and reassessing. Well, that's fine, but you already have 5 other reasons that you're slowing down. And now you've got grief slowing you down and grief narrowing your range of thinking. But the other thing is that we're also not living very balanced lives right now. And many of us haven't been able to find that kind of balance of mental activity and physical activity. And that's really important. So I think that contributes. There's lots of different things. I guess those are a few. Oh, and let's not forget, stress is such an interesting guest to have at your house, because it both gets you ready to deal with it, and then it makes you amnesic about how to deal with it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a part, in other words, there's a part of stress that makes us forgetful about things that have worked in the past. And there's a part of stress that when you're facing that stress head on, not all of us remember the history of the stresses that we've successfully dealt with. Some lean more in that direction, and we're certainly fortunate if we have some people in our lives that lean more, into that seeing beyond the immediate. But stress definitely can have a
tunnel vision kind of
a tunnel vision. So I guess all of this is to say, I think a lot of reasons that we just kind of get tunnel vision. The great thing is, though, is a little bit of normalizing, a little bit of education, a little bit of, sharing experiences. But then what have we also not been able to do as much? Hang around and share experiences. Yeah. I mean, some people are doing this, but I wouldn't recommend having 50 people around the campfire right now and having the conversation. Well, is your 4-year-old doing this, or is your 14-year-old doing this, or is your you and your spouse, do y'all ever talk about these kinds of issues? All those simple ways that we try to keep ourselves normalized and just kind of check the directions that came with our lives. I mean, we really don't get a book of instructions for life. I understand that there's certainly many things that function that way, but I having been a part of 2 human births, there was no manual delivered as part of that immediate experience. Mm-hmm. So, but we don't have some of the ways. Now, the digital connections have certainly helped some. I mean, my goodness, I cannot imagine what would we have done in Minnesota 100 years ago with a pandemic when you can't do podcasts, and we can at least, you and I can look at each other eye to eye, although not in the same room, and then you can record this in a way that it can be shared and create other conversations along the way.
Yeah. We do have a lot more tools.
You could send somebody a letter, but if your postman had the influenza, then the postman might not come to the house for a week. Mm-hmm. And so there are some things that we can do. And I think people who've done better are people who've been able to say, well, okay, I'm sick of hearing the no's. What are the yeses? Mm-hmm. And people who have some ability to hit their restart button when they realize that they're getting tunnel vision about most anything. And, some of us, are really good at catching ourselves. Some of us are blessed that we have people around us that just catch us really well when we don't,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of help us see, beyond the next hill. But for some, you really can get uh, locked in
Yeah.
to
And
that narrow view, and that just it then either produces the basic fight, flight, or faint. We just end up doing one of those three, and I guess you can see out in our culture where we've been doing all three of those.
yeah.
Um,
And to that point specifically about people choosing to connect with their digital distractions versus connecting with the other people that are in the same room with them or in the same house with them. This kind of epidemic of anxiety that we're experiencing as well, I think also has a big factor or influence in that process too, that we're people are accustomed to using methods of distraction or avoidance to
mhm.
soothe that anxiety or bring that anxiety down. And then, like you said, if connecting with my family means that I have to communicate about these stressful things that we're going to have differing opinions on or differing beliefs about, and that's going to further create anxiety and stress for
Yeah.
me, well then I don't want to have those conversations
Yeah.
either then.
Well, and because successfully addressing almost any kind of anxiety uh, means developing some tolerance for kind of the first speed bump of anxiety of, you're going to get a little more anxious about this before you begin to feel the relief of the things you're doing to make your anxiety better.
Yeah.
You just, whether it's, you know, facing a particular fear or getting a difficult conversation started that after 15 minutes actually can bring some healing.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting those things started. That's the real challenge, and
Yeah.
there's such an inertia in addressing anxiety. It's like, how do you get started with this?
And I think too that what's important is that if that's the only time I'm connecting or communicating with somebody in my family is around these difficult topics or these anxiety kind of filled or producing conversations, it's going to be even harder. But if there are other ways that I can connect with them that are fun, that are
Yeah,
enjoyable, that are pleasant, that are nurturing, I think that kind of builds this emotional bank account that we can then draw from in terms of being good listeners and understanding and compassionate with others. But we need to have that mix of both within our family
yeah.
relationships.
Well, you've mentioned one of the words, which is, how do we have fun? And again, we look at our fun list right now, and I think a lot of people see a lot of no's.
Yeah.
I can immediately think of a few things on my fun list. No, I'm not traveling. Uh, no, I'm not seeing all these friends that I plan to connect with after retirement. Uh, no, you know, so
Yep.
everybody has. I mean, that's easy. We're not just 13-year-olds who think that the only fun is the brand new Xbox that no one can seem to put their hands on.
Mm-hmm.
We can poke a little fun at the 13-year-old for that kind of way of thinking, but we all have it at
Yep.
our own age and in our own ways. Um, but I think another big factor here is, finally, humanity has experienced something that we are all experiencing together. And there is no unanxious person in our world to talk to right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you think about disaster relief efforts. When the hurricanes hit down south, Minnesotans and Wisconsiners, they get in their relief trucks and they drive down south and they help those people. And the wisdom, if you ever take a Red Cross training or other types of disaster training, is you always want to have helpers who are not immediately impacted by what is happening. And you so the wisdom is always get helpers who are fresh and who are not impacted. Right now everybody's impacted, and I feel like we have today with the pandemic a bit of a situation like they had when Katrina hit New Orleans, because not only did that affect a lot of people, not only did it affect homes, it affected neighborhoods, it affected the whole social fabric. And so there were none of the community leaders, community resources, organizations, churches, neighborhood groceries, neighborhood watering holes.
Yeah, you're spot on. Yep.
When all of that is wiped out, and of course that when you saw the diaspora from Katrina of those people who moved to places like Houston and Shreveport and Atlanta, having to resettle. There are many factors that you can talk about, but my big point is this is a crisis that has impacted all of us. All of us are affected, and many of our organizational ways of creating support and connection have been impacted.
Yeah. So I like funnel that way down to the immediate family. And I think about a personal example for me. And that I run, you've seen me run.
Oh, I have. In every
some of the best weather,
kind,
and the worst
every
weather.
kind of weather,
Yeah.
and you stay upright. I don't know how you do it.
So I had some big kind of goals for this year with running, and those were all wiped out, right? Like no races, no events, no gathering, and so it was just gone. And so I had to kind of create and then participate in things from a quote unquote virtual sense, but a very poor substitute for the actual like gathering together and being out on a trail and running with others. And so like I felt this immediate effect for me of like that right. But then the fall rolled around, and my two oldest boys are in high school, and they love football and they were excited to play football. And then there was the no, you can't play.
Yeah.
And then there was, well, maybe, and they had a couple of practices, and then, quarantines happened. And so then it was like, well, yes, but no for you because you're quarantined. So other people get to do it, but you don't get to do it. So then now I'm missing out on it. And I saw them coping with the same thing that I had to cope with earlier in the summer. And so to take this disaster relief analogy, it's like as parents, we want to be able to be there and help and support our kids. And in many instances, we're pretty removed from whatever immediate stress they're experiencing. We might have some historical experiences with it when we were a kid or growing up or something, but we're not in it like they are right now. But this is something that we are in. And so parents are being affected. They're not immune to this, but then they're seeing their kids going through the exact same things.
Well, and there lies the heart of how to help the family, because everybody, to bring this down to the family level, everybody right now is experiencing the same thing. If I'm a parent of an adolescent, I'm not just dealing with their adolescence, which is an interesting experience by itself.
for
but
sure.
but then in addressing things like you just did, where daily there seems ups and downs, promises and disappointments, changing rules,
Yeah.
a tug of war of forces out there. And if everything's going pretty well for me in my adult life, I might have a little bit of perspective on that. But if I am working from home and I am still trying to figure out how to do that, I am having my own adolescence all over again of, wait a minute, I thought I knew how to do this career, and I thought I knew how to work with this company, and I thought I knew my boss, or I thought I knew my job description, but it's all wonky right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm having to relearn all of this, and I have to then be sometimes reassuring, sometimes firm, to help this adolescent through this when I am an absolute wreck. And oh, by the way, then there's the two younger kids who are at the ages that they're in different schools, different age groups. So they're on different school days, and their online school is on different days. And there's always one, I should be at home starting on the computer when the other one needs to be dropped off at the elementary school.
That's a reality. Yeah.
And by the way, I never paid for the amount of bandwidth that's that would be needed for all of us to be doing these things at home.
Mm.
And it's so depleting for families. The families really have had I don't just know when they've had so much to do, and things that they've not had to do before. And again, we don't have some of the usual supports.
Yeah.
But that said, again, if you can start looking for the yeses,
Mm-hmm.
there are some workarounds, but
Well, and
it's
yeah,
not where
just
we usually start.
no, it isn't, but it's where we can end up, and where we can try and, I think, cultivate. And if hopefully we can all take away this piece is like just trying to answer that question on a day-to-day basis. What can I say yes to today? What can I
Mm-hmm.
say yes to this week? That puts us in a completely different frame of mind. And
Yeah.
then when we are able to say yes to something, to experience the gratitude for being able to say yes to that. So
Yeah.
like I finally got to do a race this fall in person, and it was different, but it was so wonderful. I mean, I can easily say it was the best race of the year for me because it was the only one, but it really was a fantastic experience that
Yeah.
I got to say yes to, and I was so grateful. And then my boys got to say yes to a shortened football season,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
got to play games, and they got to practice, and they were so grateful every time they stepped
Yeah.
out onto that field. Like, they knew this isn't something I'm going to take for granted. I'm going to enjoy every second of this experience. And there was so much emotion wrapped up in those experiences too. I mean, I saw it like coming off of the field, win or lose. There's just a flood of emotion, and I think that really speaks to how grateful, how
Yeah.
much of a treasure getting to say yes to things can be.
Well, but but helping to cultivate in them a certain patience with letting life play out beyond a few hours or a few days,
Yeah,
because the first calculation is just very mathematical. Well, if if we usually play 12 games a year in football and we can only play 6, that means football is going to be half of the good experience it was before. So we're already losing half
hmm,
of our experience just before we even start. And again, that's kind of that cup half full, but it it still is where our minds go.
yeah,
But you've brought up another thing that hopefully the word gratitude will be something that I hope you hear a lot about in 6 months and a year when you talk to people kind of on the other side of this, because it it there are some people who do gratitude more quickly than I can. Gratitude comes a little slower for me sometimes. I just don't feel immediately grateful for, slamming my hand in the door, or those sorts of things.
Yeah. Yeah. Not grateful
But
for the pain.
but 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 I think what we can discover about gratitude, and I think I think the other thing to bring back where we were starting was that it's that pause. That can we really respect and value pauses? Now, all the mindfulness people and people of religious traditions who, that meditation and prayer are very much a part of their life, and those sort of devotions, that isn't front page news. And by the way, Westerners, uh, most of the rest of the world knew about mindfulness 100,000 years ago. So
Yeah.
this is not something that was, invented in American health magazines a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but to say, get more comfortable with the pause, because it is what we have.
Yeah.
That is what we have right now. And what can you do with a pause? And that, so in talking to families, so okay, so and I'll ask off the wall kinds of things. Well, do you have your kids helping you repair the car out in the garage? Well, no, they got their homework. Well, why not? You know, get them out there under the hood, or
Mm-hmm.
you know, uh, I, I've I'm not a fan of the video games and gaming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the client teens and children that I see are always horrified by when they hear some of my views on it. All that said, it's a part of our world. So
It
I
is.
ask parents, well, have you ever played one of those games? Well, if
Mm-hmm.
you have, many haven't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Find out. I mean, what can we do on the pause?
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I was one of those parents that we got an Xbox, and there's no sports to watch or anything like that, and we do enjoy it. So early on during lockdown, back in the spring and early summer, we played the NBA 2K game on Xbox, and we drafted two-man teams and created a whole tournament bracket and played through that. And then
yeah,
in the fall, even though there was football and things, we still had some quarantines and kids at home for extended periods of time. And so I said, well, let's get Madden now, and we'll play some football on the Xbox, and that's been great fun. It's
mhm,
really been enjoyable to go down, play a game, and just have that time side
yeah.
by side with the kids.
Well, and this is also a time you see the stories online, and yes, even in the newspaper for the half dozen of us that still read them. But jigsaw puzzles have made a huge comeback.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah, they're like sold
uh,
out.
board games have
Mhm.
made a huge comeback. Different kinds of card games and playing cards have made a big comeback. Those those are very simple ways that we can all say yes in different ways. We've traded a lot of links back and forth about movies and streaming music, and
Sure.
things,
Yeah.
some of these amazing performances that I would have never seen on Broadway, but had the opportunity uh, to see. And in some cases didn't have to pay anything, and then
Yeah.
once in a while, paid that $10. But it's like, well, um,
It's
if
worth
we
it.
had gone to see it at $150 a ticket, yeah,
Yeah.
$10, puts it into perspective. But
Perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
but those are the things that we can say yes to. But kind of realizing that this has been such a long haul has been quite the adjustment. So
And again, coming back to this point about parents supporting their kids and encouraging them to be on the side of resilience, it's really starts with the parents being on the side of resilience, like doing some of that intentional work to reflect on and then choose to say, yep, I'm going to say yes to these things, and look for ways to connect and create opportunities for that connection. And so it's, I don't know a parent that I've ever talked to that have said, no, I don't want my child to be resilient, or I don't want them to grow and develop into a strong, independent kind of person, right? But it's helping, and this is a phrase that you've used. It's helping parents find in themselves the things that they want to grow in their children, right? That doesn't come from a hack or some like parenting top 10 list of, oh, do
yeah,
these things and then your child's going to be resilient. It really comes through the hard work of that parent doing that, and then modeling it
yeah.
and having that child experiencing it over the course of time within that close relationship.
And that's so important. And I think we can rather quickly think of ways that when parent that can go badly when parents kind of over connect or over identify with what a child is going through, and then in their discomfort, by gosh, we're going to get this fixed right now because
Mm-hmm.
you know i'm I am I am uncomfortable, you know and I think one of the stresses with kids is, sometimes they're not as distressed about some of these issues as the parents. So um, but I like, in working with the parents, is to help them back up and, well, how did they learn? What lessons do you want your child to learn about this, about, the patience, or using the pause, or finding the gratitude, well, how did you do it? How did you learn that at your age? And of course, sometimes, well, I didn't. And, you hear a really important story as to why, though it's now really important that they want this kid to get a lesson that maybe they didn't get until later. Well, that's a very kind thing to want to give to your child. It just can't always be delivered as forcefully and urgently as I'd like to deliver it,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm uncomfortable about something. So, but helping them to know that, helping parents to know who are the people who've contributed to their sense of what it is to be a good parent, or a good nurturer, or, an encourager.
Yeah.
um, who are those people? Because these all of these resilient qualities, they're not ingredients like a recipe in a cookbook. They they really are things that are relational based. And so if I have people in my life that have shown me patience, and have maybe nudged me toward patience
Mm-hmm.
sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And those become my resources to pass on, uh, and to help people reconnect with that, because that's really, you'd like for your kids to take you seriously. Well, we'll take the people seriously in your own life who have contributed to your well-being, um, and also have some confidence. Family life can sometimes feel very defeating. It's like, oh my gosh, um, just I can't seem to get anything right with this bunch. And the thing is, in my role, I hear teenagers say that. I hear 10-year-olds say that. I hear 45-year-old parents say that. I hear 25-year-old parents of toddlers say that. It's like we all feel like sometimes family is where we're the least impactful. But frankly, that's a good time to pause, and I really think that's some of the things that we can do, during this pandemic, is just to, well, what can we do a little differently with this family life of ours? What are the yeses?
And I think what that speaks to when you're saying, reflecting on where did I learn this? Where did I get this value for gratitude or for practicing patience, or maybe that's something that I've chosen, like I want to build this more in my life. I see the value in it and I want to pass that along to my children. I think that's really speaking to this legacy of strength, this phrase that you've used in the past, that it's like, okay, these are things that are strengths for me, or that I have grown and cultivated, or I'm still trying to grow and cultivate, that I want to pass along to my children, that I want them to be able to have as well. And so again, I think that starts with focusing on the yeses, but it's also a focus not on the tunnel vision of all the bad things that are happening, but what are the resources that we have as a family to be able to meet the challenges that we're facing and persist and grow and continue to develop in spite of these things, rather than kind of throw up our hands and say, no, it's useless anyway.
Well, and I think one of the things that I often do working with families is help both parents with their role, but also kids with their role, to be more kind of self-affirming when they do things well, or when they have lived by their guidelines, and reinforce that, because sometimes in families we don't always give that feedback to each other. I mean, some of us wait well until the kids are in adulthood for them to say, you did a real fine job with that, Dad. And not most teenagers, some will, and boy, you're raising them well if they can come to you and say, look, thanks for hanging in there with that with me. But usually it's later. And parenting is not a job that you get a lot of immediate positive feedback from the
recipient.
The recipients. But of course, kids can say the same thing, because it's like, well, they always know what I've done wrong, but I could do 100 right things, and that just
because
parents feel
what's expected, right?
Parents feel the same way, but it is fun to also help people just puzzle about what are the strengths, what is going well, how did you come by that, why is that important to you, who taught you that lesson, when you think of that quality, who do you know that was the best example of that quality? Because those kind of conversations, you bring the story back, but the story actually brings back a change in physiological state of having a bit of that person there, a bit of that experience there, and then and working with the parent, helping them parent themselves for a moment before they parent the cranky kid or teenager. And I do the same thing in the other direction. How can I help the cranky kid or teenager do a little bit better job themselves, so the feedback they do give with parents, or their comebacks, um, have a little better effect.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that I've taken away from you, from my time in your classes, and learning from you is, yeah, helping families share those kind of strength-based stories, helping families connect with one another, and have explicit forms of appreciation for one another, because that really cultivates this positive perspective on one another, that, hey, that we are in this together. We are, we do care for one another, and we want the best for one another. And then not just operating like this, that's just the assumption, and we never need to say that, but to be explicit and find ways of communicating and conveying that to one another, frequently and authentically. So thank you for that.
Well, I think you answered your own question quite well there, Ben. I could not have improved on it.
So as we're getting close to the end of our time today, I'm curious as to, what kind of things you're looking forward to on the horizon. I know in retirement, like you said, there were a lot of no's of things that you had planned to say yes to, but as you look forward, what are some of the things that you're trying to say yes to, personally, professionally?
Well, I have really tried to prepare myself for what was a planned pause. Of, okay, as I retire, what are some things I'd like to make sure that I continue to challenge myself and be involved in. I rarely have good timing with things, but I did stumble into a really good topic to get into last year, which was, as I retire, there's so much talk about telehealth and the opportunities there, and what is really this process of doing therapy online, and can we do that, and can we do it with integrity, and then working with kids and teens, how do we have it interactional and play based, and incorporate all the kind of the physical components that are not as easy to do. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, that would be a really interesting thing to read up on, because probably by 2023 or 25, we're going to probably be doing a lot of that.
Fast forward.
Of course, the joke was on me, because not 6 weeks after retiring, we suddenly hear about this COVID thing. Yeah. A few weeks later, we're beginning to realize this isn't just somewhere else. This is going to be here. Yeah. And then a few more weeks down the line, this really is here. It's going to profoundly affect everybody. And by the way, here is the shutdown order. And those of you in mental health services who wish to continue work will be doing that work through telehealth. Yeah. So the first thing I was going to get into, I dove into, because that was my first deep end of the pool. That was my now I would have preferred to do some of that traveling in that, but it has been a good experience, and it's just great fun to know there's still plenty of things out there to learn and do in the field, and there are other challenges. But some other things I'm going to be doing is we talked about how we don't pause, and we do so many things and we don't reflect. I have 3 or 4 things. It's like, okay, now that I'm slowing down a bit, what are some things I wish that I could have lingered on? Almost like if you've gone to a very famous tourist destination with only 2 days, and you want to be able to, okay, but if I had 2 weeks, well, there's some things like the resilience work. Um, I plan on continuing to update myself on, because there are some spots that I haven't gotten to look at as much. And of course, there's still a lot going on, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how it gets applied in both how we understand how we dealt with the pandemic, and then how do we understand how we get ourselves out of it, and do we keep any good lessons from it? I mean, my goodness, I do hope humankind gets their money's worth out of all this trouble, because we've certainly had plenty of trouble. I certainly hope we have plenty of lessons that we can learn about ourselves and you know, our careers and our families. I mean, that can be helpful in the future. But
that's fantastic. I agree. I certainly hope, and I'm going to steal that phrase. I'm going to use that, that humanity gets its money's worth from all of this trouble.
Yeah, let's hope so.
Yeah. Anything that you have been reading, listening to, watching that has really kept your interest, that you want to share with our audience today?
Well, there are two things. Personally, I'd actually originally had a good bit of training in a life that I didn't pursue, in music, and I have been an organist and was trained for that years ago, and I have gotten in and out of that through my adult life. As you know, when I'd have a pause, I'd go back to that. Never imagined myself that would be a career, but it just has turned out to be an important part of my life, that every time I slow down a little bit, that's what I want to do. Well, we did purchase a home instrument this year, and
Wow.
came just in time for Thanksgiving, and
Okay.
what great timing that, you know, I could use holiday music to kind of try it out with. So I've done that, and I know in this interesting political world that we live in, but I'm gonna give a plug for President Obama's autobiography, his first volume that came out a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
Because what I find so interesting about it is his ability to kind of write in several channels at the same time. He tries to give some history, and unlike many writers, he also seems to really try to get the 360 view of, you know, understanding, well, why would people have said that, or why would that happen, or, you know, what would be in the minds of that country when this occurred, or what were they thinking when, you know, they opposed that legislation. I mean, he not only gives you kind of the history, but then he really tries to give a 360 of the context. In fact, some of the criticism has been he spends so much time doing 360 that, but I've really enjoyed that, because then he also has a lot of internal dialogue too. So then how did he sort through that? And what is his takeaway now a few years down the road? So I think that people of a wide political persuasion would find it a very compelling book. Not to agree with everything that was said, maybe, like a few of us might, but to really get to be a fly on the wall during, you know, some history that is still very, very fresh on our mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I love reading history, but, you know, kind of, it's one thing to read about Churchill's war room, in London as the bombs are going off, and it's fascinating. But it was also very fascinating to be able to get the viewpoint of what's going on, in very recent history. And while we still don't know what the judgment of history may be,
Sure.
To begin to get a little perspective, I've just found it really, really engaging, and kind of regardless of person or politics, it's an outstanding way to write a book.
Well, and I agree, regardless of your political persuasion. Like, I think if we're only listening to and reading things that just reinforce what we already think, and kind of living in that echo chamber, that we need to challenge ourselves more. And so if there's an opportunity there to be able to say, yeah, I don't agree with everything. Great. Challenge yourself, expose yourself to that so that you can be thoughtful about it, and think critically about some of those topics. So very cool. Very cool. Appreciate that recommendation. John, it has been fantastic. It's been wonderful. It's just been fun for me,
Yeah,
honestly, to be able to converse with you about these topics today, and then get to share that with a well-minded audience. So thank you, John, for coming on the
absolutely.
podcast.
It has just been a pleasure to converse with you here. So thank you very much for hosting me, Ben. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John, for coming on the show, and many thanks to all of you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe through your podcast app so that you automatically get the latest episode. Also, consider taking a moment to review the show if you found our discussion meaningful to you. Word of mouth is great too. Let people know about the Well-Mind podcast and spread the word. Please check out the show notes in the description to find links to the resources referenced during my conversation with John. Also new for this year, I have created an email for the podcast. It is thewellmind@blc.edu. Again, it is thewellmind, all one word, no spaces, at blc.edu. If you have questions for me about the show, or recommendations for a specific topic, or voice that you'd like to hear on the show, please drop me a message. Many thanks to the staff here in the Bethany Lutheran College podcast studio. Greg, Seth, and Caleb are tremendous in providing technical support for the podcast. Special thanks to Lauren McMacken for designing the logo and cover art. And before I finish up today, I want to let you know about a special event that is coming up at the end of January for the Well-Mind. I will be doing my first live podcast event on January 27th. That's a Wednesday in the evening. It's from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. The focus of the live podcast will be on college student mental health during the pandemic. I've asked a number of mental health professionals, counselors, to come into the studio with me to have a roundtable discussion. I'm going to be soliciting questions from college students here at Bethany Lutheran College and at a neighboring college, Martin Luther College, to gather some questions for the show. We're also going to be answering live questions during the show as well. That's going to be set up through a Zoom webinar format. I'll have somebody moderating the chat for me at that point. Really excited about this event. So as it gets closer, I'll be releasing more details through the podcast, and I will share the link for the webinar so that if you want to attend, or you know parents of a college student or college students that might benefit from this kind of discussion, you can tell them about that, share that link. So as soon as I have that set up, I will be publishing that on the podcast platform. So January 27th, 6:30 p.m., that's Central Standard Time. We're going to go about an hour roundtable discussion on college student mental health. Very excited about that, kind of a new aspect to the podcast, and I can't wait to share it with you. So thanks again for listening, and until next time, be well.